My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
I just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimp and Way.
Yes, MailChimp and Way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp.
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the forensic psychotherapist Dr Jennifer Cox. She trained at the Tavistock and now has an extensive practice specialising in treating women with undiagnosed anger. As part of this work, she developed the Women Are Mad approach to help women who can't afford therapy to think below the surface, as she puts it, about where their rage might be coming from. Sounds like it might be useful? I thought so too. Jen is also the co-host of the Women Are Mad podcast and has written a book called Women Are Angry, which is very much what it says on the tin. Her mission? To help us identify our rage and let it the hell out. Productively, of course.
Shutting yourself in the toilet cubicle at work and doing star jumps or running on the spot or kind of screaming into a cushion at home, which is very muffling and people genuinely can't hear that. And then letting your brain come back online.
Jen joined me for a fascinating conversation about the nature of female rage and why she thinks we're seeing such a groundswell of fury right now. We also discussed the impact of being a young carer, when and why we learn to bitch, why it's easier to be a worried person than an angry one, and the moment the anger penny dropped for her. I should also warn you that there's passing discussion of suicidal ideation, eating disorders, and depression. And I'm going to throw you straight in at the deep end before we get talking about women's anger, which I know that we could talk about all day. And in fact, with nearly every interview I do, I think that if we started there, we could talk about it all day.
Yeah, you
But
would.
I want to talk about you a bit first. Yeah, straight to your uncomfortable place.
The panic
Your
eyes.
face, honestly. I want you to tell me a bit about little Jen.
Oh, wow.
And your upbringing.
But it's so funny because obviously the only place I ever really do this is with my own therapist. I don't think there's anyone else in my life. I mean, okay, so there's the besties, you know, there's the Salima and there's the like ride or die Andy, who is also a therapist, and plus a couple of others. They're the core. But mostly that sort of overview, the person that knows from, you know, cradle to where I am now, it's not my family, it's my therapist.
Yeah, so how long have you been in therapy?
Since I was 20, I think. So sort of just before I left uni. Yeah, it all began.
What made you go into therapy?
What family isn't very complicated, but I guess I was a young carer. So I was kind of, I would say, born into a therapist's role. I knew what to do. I know how to prioritize, you know, the other's story. That's my comfortable place. And I love it. You know, I can't get enough. But what that meant was I kind of became resourceful under the surface. So I went to a really quite bad high school in quite a deprived area. It was like a special measures, went into special measures, I think after I left. No one had heard of Oxbridge really.
No.
It just wasn't a thing, which I think also meant that I didn't realize that that was impossible. So I just thought, well, I mean, James Herriot, I think, went there, and I wanted to be a vet. So I'd heard of it through that. And I remember doing the application at the dining room table, and my dad looking over my shoulder going, people like us don't go there.
Mm.
And I mean, he was right. They didn't. There
No,
weren't many
quite.
people like me when I was there. But I think I learned
When
to
would this have been?
96 I went, but I took myself to King's because I'd read that they accepted state schools or were kind of trying to, up their state school quotient. But the thing is, the reality wasn't that at all. I mean, there were definitely, like compared to other colleges, there was a significant handful of us. We formed a little clump very early on. What was quite weird as well was that I didn't really know what a private school was. I hadn't, in the town I grew up, there weren't private schools. It just was not a thing.
Yeah, also, there's the kind of, so in my town, there was like a private school where I thought the posh kids went. And there was a convent, and then there were all the state schools. But I didn't understand the private public thing.
No.
I kind of thought public meant public, like everybody could go. No.
Yes, I know. That's just daft, isn't it? And one of those, the eccentricities of our language and culture. But also, it's so testimony, like it's just keeping us out. Like it doesn't want us to understand. I was really obsessed with communication, connection. I can't tell you at what point the kind of vet dream disappeared, but it was to do with keeping everyone happy. Like that was why I made that decision ultimately. When I got there, I quickly realized this wasn't making me happy. I'm not a linguist. It's not my bag. And I started to borrow papers from other subjects. Quickly, psychology started filling up my roster. And I was taught by the amazing psychoanalyst Juliet Mitchell, who is like, doyenne of analysis. And she sort of took me under her wing a bit. And that was the other thing about the little, spoilt groups that you were taught in. It was so cosseted. And that's the thing, I can pretend to be not of privilege, but as soon as you go there, you're a privileged person. So fuck off. From then on, I think I just decided, right, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be. Very quickly on graduating, I just kind of started accruing more and more experience, training more. At that point, it was very easy to get work. This is quite scary. As a young woman with no qualifications really, in very like sharp edge services. So I went into forensic work like straight out of what's the expression off the bat?
Gate. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always mixing up my metaphors, so don't look at me.
I won't look at you. But whatever that expression is, so I was kind of working in these places that I definitely shouldn't have been working. And I think what that did was make me tough. I had to put up with a lot. I mean, it was quite astonishing, really, the stuff going on, because I was working with paedophiles, murderers, like proper, violent offenders. I just felt weirdly, this is where I need to be. I'm doing good work. This is where my skills are sort of coming into play. And it was incredibly fulfilling. But then I started to have kids, and I guess I was quite young for like London terms. And I had a couple of quite unsettling experiences. One of which was I was really heavily pregnant, and I was in this small room with an offender who was in prison for murdering a pregnant woman.
Oh, God.
And I had to stop him from looking at something on the computer that he was not allowed to be looking at. and he turned on me, and I had not, they didn't have any alarms anywhere in the building, because interestingly, it was like a kind of, it was run along psychodynamic principles, which is, how I work now. So it's kind of psychoanalytic, really. So we had to rely on our wits and our instinct, and essentially reading the projections and get out if we thought we were in
Oh,
danger.
great. Yeah. So
But
it
you
was
can't
all on
move.
you,
It was
basically.
all on us. And if we got it wrong, well, sorry, better luck next time. I was cornered and I couldn't move because I was so huge. Unfortunately, and I think she'll never know quite how much of a close call this was, my co-worker who was in the nursing station behind me, she heard something that didn't sound quite right and came bursting out. And that was enough to break it. But I mean, it was horrible. And from then on, I just thought, yeah, I need to be a bit more sensible now. I think there was another time, I mean, I didn't leave straight away, because I did have a sort of moment of when I'd, gone back to work after maternity leave, feeling like, God, I've left my child with another person to come and look after men who were abandoned when they were babies, or, at various points after that. What am I doing? So I just thought, I need to radically over, my approach and rein everything in a bit. And that is actually when I sort of started formalizing everything and went to the Tavistock and started my training.
How old were you then?
29, 30, something like that. And that was young. Like, they weren't going to let me, but I don't know. I must have a knack, Sam, of like shoving my foot indoors where I'm not meant to be, because I think that is a repeated theme.
I was going to say, where do you think that comes from? Can you remember the first time you did it?
I think the first time I can really remember was the kind of audacity of sending off that application form and everyone going, what are you doing that for? And I think the confidence that gave me that kind of anything is possible, you just have to work your tits off. And Sam, I mean, I work fucking hard. I never stop working. I guess it's potentially not great for me health-wise, but equally I don't feel great when I'm not working, a kind of 40-hour clinical week, plus doing the podcast, plus writing. I feel at my best when I am absolutely stretched to the max. And I suppose my family has grown up kind of used to that. But I did have a dilemma with small babies, because I was really signed up to the attachment approach. So the way I got around it was I just strapped them to me constantly and carried on with my life.
So what does your therapist, who presumably it's not the same one as you started seeing when you were 20, what does your therapist say about your busy approach to life?
It's really interesting, because no one's ever tried to slow me down. I'm thinking about like what's the sort of the stuff they sort of zone in on more. Do you know when they try and stop me is when they realize I'm doing the young carer bit and it's for other people. I think when they think this is for her and she's getting a massive dopamine hit out of this, it doesn't disturb them so much. I think it's when they think I'm clicking into something that answers, a kind of childhood pathology.
A learned thing.
Yeah.
Where were you at when you started to get interested in women and anger?
God, that's good. I think I was very angry myself. I think there's a point for women, and I see it all over, and you'll have seen this, where the penny drops and they go, what the fuck?
Yeah, totally.
And it is somewhere around coming out of that massively the child-centric fug, when you've just been up to your eyes in proper toddler stuff. So you can breathe a bit, but that's when everything else hits and you realize, oh, right. So I'm expected to carry on with that, plus do my job, plus look after, how many other people? I think it was for me that a sort of perfect storm possibly hitting it around COVID, which, Sam, I have never been so furious. I actually woke myself up one night having slapped myself in the face because I was so angry. I was so angry. And it was something about the being hemmed in. I had really strong views at the time about the lockdowns. I could see people falling apart. It was even pre-Zoom, that first lockdown. So we all went onto phone. So I was in a dark room wearing a horrible old fleece from literally kind of 7 a.m. till I don't know what time at night, back-to-back calls. I had people who were trying to jump out of a window. I had people with anorexia who were getting significantly, iller. I had like domestic abuse situations, like literally where I was saying, hang up and call the police. I mean, Sam, it was kind of like hell. I couldn't quite believe what was happening. And obviously I wasn't in the NHS anymore. And the NHS were getting all the, yes, come on NHS. And I was thinking, here I am picking up the pieces, having to send messages out to kind of people's GPs and, various other crisis services, and thinking, if I wasn't here, who would be holding this up? So I think there was also something about, oh yeah, just another woman propping up the system. And I suppose I'm very, very sensitized to that because of growing up, in the family that I did, and seeing just how much kind of free care was being provided by, by family members, and how much was left to families to sort out, and invariably it's women. And I guess sitting with patient after patient, once we got through COVID, but the repercussions, I mean, they will last for lifetimes, because the kids, I mean, honestly, I don't get me started on the childhood crisis, because I think there is what we are shafting these kids. And I think in part it's because we're shafting the mothers, and how can they possibly contain, since we are still in a place where mums are pretty much primary carers, they're not looked after. How can we look after these poor ones coming up? So I guess I was kind of aggregating these feelings in myself. Sarah Everard happened. I started to hear the same. I guess the frequency I was tuning into change, and I was hearing the same things on repeat from the women in my practice. Then Roe v. Wade happened. And I just thought, what the fuck is happening? And then I guess Andrew Tate popped up, and it's like, okay, so we get this tiny molecule of power. Do we? I don't know if we even do.
But that's what it is, isn't it? It feels like that to me. It feels like, we take a few steps forward and the dinosaur roars and goes, oh my God, we need to deal with this. And all of a sudden, abortion rights are in turmoil. Andrew Tate is indoctrinating young men. We've got Trump, we've got, all these things. And it does feel like, I can't remember who I was talking to, but I was interviewing someone and I was talking about the witch trials.
Yes.
For some reason. And somebody said, and the person I was talking to, and I truly can't remember who it was, said, yeah, but look at what was going on in the world at that point. Queen Elizabeth, that we had very powerful women ruling Europe.
Oh, this is amazing. What
really
a great observation.
And I just hadn't thought of that. And she was like, so coming rolls in James the First or the Sixth or whatever, depending on where you're living. And all of a sudden, all of the women who are not quite in the right box are being called witches and living in a state of fear at best.
And it's the women with power, I guess, that they've got
kind of a weird power, but yeah, something that men don't understand.
Totally. And they've got access to them. So that they can't access Elizabeth I, but they can get to the weird old crone in the village who seems to wield something that, they don't have. And her they can duck or put on a stake. That's a brilliant observation. I like that.
Which kind of ties in, and I feel like if I go here, I'm never going to get you back on course. But it does kind of tie in with what you say in the book and what, a lot of women say about perimenopause and menopause and the way women start to realize they're being treated in midlife, because there's something, I think, something about menopausal women that men, society, patriarchy, blah, don't understand and can't control.
Well, do you know something? This is what I'm really starting to observe in patients and in women around me, actually, is this kind of second coming of energy, power,
Yeah, totally.
potential, and capacity.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think, that's one heady mix, isn't it? And they
Yeah,
can't
definitely.
stand it.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with it, because we can't, I mean, you write about all this, but we can't be reduced to our bodies anymore, because our bodies don't tragically fit the bill, and we don't got no eggs.
No eggs, but our
So
minds keep growing. And
yeah,
I really see, men seem to shrivel and shrink. Maybe it's because they don't have to put in the effort. All this expansion we've done, we've got, we've grown so many limbs, kind of metaphorically speaking. Well, they don't shrivel up and disappear. We've still got them at our disposal. So what are we going to do next? And
exactly.
it is amazing seeing all these women in their kind of late 40s, 50s, really having this incredible second kind of awakening. And this time they're not shackled. This time they haven't got babies hanging off them and schools phoning them. They can go. And I think that is really potentially very frightening for men, for kind of, let's say their colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, if we stop believing it's all over, and we start to see, well, okay, all these other obligations are gone, or they're not, because of course, people have ailing parents and older children and all of those things, but you've maybe lost that kind of obligation to nurture. I mean, the number of women I speak to are like, okay, bring it on, what next? And then in the next breath, they'll say that, their partner or husband or whatever is a bit like, oh, well, we're going to put our feet up now. And she's like, no. You might want to put your feet up, but I don't want to put my feet up. So you're fine. You carry on over there putting your feet up, but I'm going off here.
I just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimp and Way.
Yes, MailChimp in Way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp.
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
How are your anger levels now?
Writing the book was what I absolutely had to do. I didn't have a choice. It wrote itself. I mean, it was like, what the hell am I going to do with this stuff? Okay, here's my laptop, off I go. And I think the process of churning it out and the catharsis of feeling it flowing from my fingers was just bliss, in terms of, this simmering, and often not just simmering, but like quite explosive rage in me had an outlet. And I think that's really where it went. And then I think it was in sort of offering the opportunity to other women. So that's when I kicked off the whole WHAM movement, sort of simultaneous to the book, because I thought this book is like, for me right now, I don't know what's going to happen with this. It wasn't a book, it was just me writing.
Yeah.
And the urgency was so great. I just thought, I can't just be here with this knowledge and not sharing it, only able to help this many women a week. There's a world out there. There's people who can't afford therapy. What can I give them? Yeah. So that's when I started doing the sort of online Zoom sessions, and that went quite international. And then, so this is when I say it sounds like it was all sort of across years, it all happened within a year. And within that same year, Salima, who's a really old closest friend, said, oh, look, why don't we just do a podcast? Like, let's get this speeded up. Let's get this out there. And we did. And I mean, you must find the same thing, actually. I think when you give women a sort of proper platform to speak and say what
Mm.
they want, and you don't stop them and you just sort of hand them the tools, it's, of course, why wouldn't they want to come on, knowing that what they're saying will be helpful to so many others.
I mean, the timing is perfect, but I think there's such a need, and that's what I found. And I apologize to anybody who's listened to the podcast since the beginning and has heard me say this about a bazillion times. But, it was absolutely instantaneous that the podcast just hit, and that
Oh,
I
yes.
wanted to hear older women's voices, and so did everybody else, or not
Yeah.
everybody, but loads of other older women.
Oh
Just
my God. Yeah, not
like,
everybody. Not everybody.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about women and anger. Give us a very quick, and I mean quick, science lesson about what anger and not expressing it is doing to our bodies.
The repression of anger. So if you think about it in terms of the adrenaline, cortisol, that is sort of, hallmark of that feeling, if you don't express that and allow it to move through your body, through your bloodstream, and sort of into, the way I see it is kind of external surfaces. It's there to help you run or fight. But if you don't do either of those things, it's stuck in you. So if you can't run or fight, put it somewhere else, give it to something else. And that's why I talk a lot about kind of explosive movements, which literally gets that kind of kinetic energy out of your body. So it's sort of transported away that way. Or impact. So running or hitting something, it just gets it out of your body in the way that it's meant to. And obviously, as women, we never do that stuff. I mean, we might run, we might swim, but we don't do it in order to mobilize specifically anger and negative feelings and frustration and resentment and all that stuff out of ourselves. We do it often because, we want to look better or, take care of our bodies. But what about all the shit that's built up in there that needs to get out? And that's why, I think it can be a very democratic solution, because you don't need money for this. And all you need is to really listen to yourself and be aware of those feelings and be honest about those feelings and be prepared to give yourself the opportunity to get them out. And whether it is like literally shutting yourself in the toilet cubicle at work and doing star jumps or running on the spot, or kind of screaming into a cushion at home, which is very muffling and people genuine, you can't hear that. And then letting your brain come back online, because the adrenaline, the cortisol stop your brain from functioning properly. So that's why you kind of freeze. That's why you can't think of the thing to say. So give yourself the time, like get it out, give yourself moments to breathe and come back into the room. And obviously I talk about that in the book, is the importance of coming back in. And I think this, particularly for women of our kind of age, often we're like, oh, it's not worth it. And it is worth it. You got to get back in. This is what you fought for. And that's what breaks my heart, is just the sort of, I haven't got the energy.
Just going, I've had enough.
Yeah.
You see that so often. And sometimes people just go, oh, fuck this, I'm done. Those who probably have the privilege and the emotional support to do it might do their own thing or whatever. But it's if you don't get back in the room, then, the people in the room don't really care. And that's
what
one
was
of the
it all
things,
for then?
Yeah, that's one of the things that struck me. It's a bit like, I'm reading all these books. Loads of people I know are reading all these books, having all these conversations, listening to all these podcasts. But I don't know about you, how many of them are men? I mean, I'm like, I think 5% of the Shift podcast listeners are men. And hello, if you're one of them, I love you. Tell your friends.
Yes.
But it's like, not to be negative, but firstly, how do you get yourself to a place where you can, like a friend of mine used to go and get in her car and go and drive out into the hills outside the town she lived in and scream place down.
Yeah.
How do you get yourself to a place where you can even recognize that when you've been, taught to be good, to be apologetic, to worry about how other people feel, to reduce your boundaries? I mean, I'm massively paraphrasing a million conversations I've had in your entire book. But when you've been trained like that to be a good girl and,
Ladylike.
apologize all the time, ladylike, don't take up too much space, don't show off, always comparing yourself and finding yourself wanting. I mean, like ditching all of that and going in the loo and doing star jumps is quite a big leap, isn't
It's
it?
huge. It's huge. And isn't it nuts that it should be so huge? Because it's just natural. It's like it's what this apparatus internally was intended for. It just wants us to know when something is wrong for us and that we need to change it. But that we're so far away from being able to recognize that and give ourselves the experience that, we need is shocking. And it does, hearing you say all those kind of, the statements that we all grew up with, repeated back. I'm speechless. It never fails to make my blood boil because it's just true. And this was our life, all of us. And I don't know how different it is for the girls coming through because they've got so much to deal with that we actually didn't have when we were that age. And yeah, the Andrew Tates of this world, well, thanks, because, that's stitching up a generation of boys and girls, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. That's the whole other thing, isn't it? It's the boys and what they're learning. But I
Poor
think on the one
boys.
hand, I look at the girls on social media and they're so much more assertive, and I hate the word feisty because I just think you never call a man feisty, but they're so much more assertive and sure of themselves, and they seem more confident. And then at the same time, I look at my goddaughter who's now 10, 11, and watched her go through a process of going to school, suddenly caring about pink and unicorns, where she'd never cared about pink and unicorns before, suddenly coming home and saying she'd been told that she couldn't be a princess because she wasn't blonde and she didn't have white skin.
Oh,
And then you watch all of that and you just think it's what we were just saying. It's the steps forward and steps back thing, isn't it? Yeah. On the one hand, young women they're so much more emotionally literate than we were. But at the same time, they're still picking up all these messages.
Of course.
They're still self-bullying and
yes, that's it.
Conforming and comparing,
And I think, it is an uphill battle, isn't it? And I guess so much of it doesn't occur, or people think they haven't got kind of time for or energy for. And the point of it is you don't need time or money or, sort of a brilliant, I don't know, education even. You just need to be listening to yourself and wanting your daughter to have the same stuff as your son. That's all.
Yeah.
And if we could all just get onto that track and be honest about it, because I think people can say it, but if you don't think about the impact on bodies, especially like this is just lip service, I think it remains these sort of pipe dreams, and then nothing really changes from one generation to the next. And I think the patriarchy gets better at staying one step ahead, creating the right equality forms that you have to agree. Yes, I suppose you have done that and you have done that, but we know what bullshit it really is. We know whose school is still phoning,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I'll never forget someone I worked with when I had a business who, her husband was working. We were working in central London. He was working around the corner from the school. He was the top name on the phone tree and they still phoned her.
Oh, God.
They still phoned her. And it's just like, oh, honestly, I mean, it's a whole other conversation. I think one of the things that I've noticed in the women I speak to through the podcast is that maybe with perimenopause, maybe just coincidence, maybe other factors, or it may also be that we're seeing young women be a bit more gobby. But one of the things I'm definitely seeing is an emerging, I don't want to, entitlements got such negative connotations, but a sense that actually, maybe I am entitled to have boundaries. Maybe I am allowed to say no. Maybe I don't have to apologize. But it's that, how do we teach that's what I keep coming back to, is with the lessons we've been taught and with the language that we don't have, like the lack of vocabulary around anger for women. It's like, you're not assertive or decisive, you're bossy or hysterical. I remember doing an event for the Shift book and a woman in the audience saying to me, you know, I agree with all this and I love your book. When I try to say this at home, my husband and kids just take the piss. They just go, oh, here she goes again.
Oh, isn't that
So what do I do
shit?
about that? And I couldn't
Yeah.
really answer that. Who am
I
I
know.
to tell her husband to sod off?
I mean, leave him.
Yeah,
That's what you want to say.
yeah,
And
exactly.
this is the point about the community, actually, that I think has been so powerful, is that, yeah, you realize on your own that even trying your hardest to make that decision to prioritize, you know, your need, imagine that, to adopt some boundaries, you're up against kind of probably a family that has expected the opposite of you. So how do you suddenly start to implement this stuff? Like, yes, it's one thing teaching the daughters, and let's hope we can do that better. But teaching ourselves and teaching those around us. And this is where I think talking together really openly, and this is, you know, my obsession with kind of honest, authentic communication and connection between women. I'm obsessed with it. I think it can, you know, you can move mountains with it. I think women are incredible. It does give you strength to go back into your home and go, no, because you know what? Susan's doing it differently and I'm not. I'm going to go on holiday with her. You know, just small things, or no, you make your own dinner tonight, or whatever it is. And it doesn't need to be nasty or like pulling a rug. I think it can be confident and decisive.
Obviously, I wouldn't expect you to speak about anybody in particular, but in your practice, do you see common threads?
Definitely. I think one of them is that people bring their partner, their male partner, into therapy a lot, like, as in psychologically.
Not literally.
Not
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
I mean, they may as well have. The impact in the room is very much like, oh, here he is. Because the male partner refuses to get therapy himself. So basically, all his issues are borne by the wife, and she can't deal with them on her own. So I have to, you know, help her. And yes, I gladly will. But why can't he also do this? So that's very common. And sadly, I do feel like we haven't advanced much in terms of the arrangement of the load in households.
No, we
And
haven't.
that's why I think there is a kind of age at which it hits that women who have had, you know, they were equals, they really were team players all the way through until a certain point. And then suddenly they're realizing, hang on, he got a promotion. And hang on, school is still phoning me, or whatever it is. Hang on, what, he's out again, but we haven't arranged any childcare and I wanted to go out, you know, and so she can't. And it's these really boring, repeated themes. And honestly, it's like they're trying to keep us in the 1950s, and so is the rest of society. I don't think this comes down to individual men. I think a lot of men feel really hamstrung by this. They're not very happy either. I think they'd really like it if their female partner could carry on being that equal. It's a lot more fun. So
long as they don't have to do anything different, though.
I mean, there is that.
It feels to me like that's why we're seeing this kind of menopause movement that's kind of happening now, because like we were the first generation to live our lives that way, and then to be, you know, pushed back into our lane by, not by individual men, by society and structures and all of that.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like we're almost like the hinge between boomers and millennials.
It's like we've been pincered. I think that's a really good point. And if I back you there, Sam,
I'll be calling you up when I need it.
Yeah, tag me. I'm really curious to see how this does play out in future generations, if left alone. I mean, hopefully the effect of people like us kind of talking a lot about these things does start to change stuff. Otherwise, what's the point? You know, that's what we have to hope. It's almost like there was this feeling of we're going to just say yes to everything. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, but we haven't really stopped to think about what the reality of that will look like. You know, so yes, she can do that. Yes, yes, yes. Put it on her. Yes, yes, yes. But then, oh, hang on. Yeah, we didn't stop and think about how it would work. The fact that she still has to give birth to a baby and it will be hanging off her boobs for the, you know, next year. It's like it just was really badly thought through, but we're the ones that have to carry the can for that. And it's like, get me on the bloody social care soapbox as well, because that hasn't been thought out, because women are at home picking up the shit, frankly. And that's just a whole other, I should stop myself because, where do you go? Awful, awful.
There's a point you made about worry, which I really, really liked, because worry is a very female thing, isn't it? It's easier to be a worried person than an angry one.
Yes. I think this talks back perfectly to the idea of, the good girl, the nice girl, the polite girl. Because where does the raging girl sit in that constellation? But the worried girl, yeah, I buy that. Just like I buy the sad girl and the shamed girl. It's essentially all these inversions of rage that I think we see and we are so familiar with. The big one is depression, because as psychoanalysts, we've always known depression is inverted anger. And I guess I take it much further in my thesis and actually suggest that, especially for women, it shows itself in this whole host of other really just mundane, everyday presentations, from things like worry and guilt. Guilt.
Yeah, anxiety.
Oh, geez. I'd say anxiety is the one that I kind of hear most often presented in terms of something that you'd go to your therapist for.
And you think that's inward deflected rage?
Yeah. The sort of shocking, the extremities of the presentations, are wild, and it's all so displaced. But once you start gently, lifting the lid and asking the questions, it is joyful to see women own themselves again, or maybe even for the first time, frankly, become themselves and sort of pace their way along the scaffolding of their feeling, to get there. It is beautiful, Sam. This is why this work is I think I'm addicted. I think I am addicted to being a therapist.
Yeah, I can see that. I can get it. Everybody's different, aren't they? So I imagine everybody who presents to you with anxiety has a different story and a different outcome.
That's what was so remarkable, that even though each of my patients across the years has had so many different, flavors of presentation and history to talk about, these themes have been so prevalent and have kind of scored themselves into my brain, and such that they started just flowing out in the form of the book.
What do you see most in much older women, in the kind of oldest age group who come to you? What are the most common things that manifest?
Sadly, this kind of calcified idea is, quite hard to work into, because, if we're talking about a lifetime, add on another 30 years to that, and it can feel really, really sad, because you kind of think, oh God, even if we get some stuff happening here, there's so much regret. There's so much regret. For some women, actually, the joy of being released at whatever point is sort of outweighs that. And they're just like, well, thank fuck. They wouldn't say that, I'm sure. But, well, one or two might. But they use that and I wonder if it does kind of end up extending their lives, improving their health, meaning that they have slightly different relationships with family members, meaning that they say no more. And, God, if you even have a couple of years like that, and those are the last ones, then it's better than nothing.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the questions I always ask at the end. What is your emotional age?
Oh, that's lush. I think 17.
Why 17?
That was my favorite year. And I kind of think I've been lucky enough to stay there or maybe find my way back to it.
Why was it your favourite year?
It was when I'd gotten through the anguish of the worst of adolescence. I felt somewhat comfortable in my own skin. I mean, that kind of came and went over the years, but that's why I feel like I've come back to that now. I felt free. It was that year, like that A-level year when you sort of don't have exams, Glastonbury. I'm obsessed with music. Like that is my lifeblood. I think I was just having that beautiful heightened experience of puberty at its best. And yeah, I think a lot of me has remained there.
Give us a book recommendation.
The first one that comes to mind is Catcher in the Rye. Can't tell you why. I think I probably read that at around that age. So isn't it funny? Unconsciously, I'm probably just like throwing you things from, my favorite era.
Interesting. What advice would you give younger women?
Be honest, mostly with yourself.
That's the pivotal thing, really, isn't it? I want to ask you about bitching.
Oh, brilliant.
Because I really thought about that. What is the point that we learn to do it and why? Because it's so toxic.
Mm-hmm. I think it is those, what you were saying about your goddaughter who sort of at a certain point in school had to change, and whatever age that might be. I mean, I'm just trying to think when you kind of see it emerge, it's the little groups. It's maybe 7 or 8. I think 8 is quite a pivotal age actually for, personality development and kind of making assumptions and observations about the world that are outside of your family and sort of putting things together in more independent ways. And maybe because that's quite a sort of, it's quite an exciting time, but also quite a scary time. So perhaps you sort of fall back on things that feel a bit comforting or like give you a boost in the moment, make you feel safe. So you align with somebody and you throw someone else out and you scapegoat that person, you feel a bit stronger. And maybe this is where it kind of kicks off. I mean, it's arguable. You could probably say even younger. But I also think it's the way in which girls are taught such wonderful communication skills, because we get 3 inches of playground to, chat on.
Yeah.
We get brilliant at talking. And I guess with that comes this sort of developed, really sophisticated sense of like social subtleties. So with the interplay of like, because I don't think boys have to be worse at this. I just think this is how we're socialized. But with that socialization plus the kind of brilliant communication tools that the conditioning is giving us, it's just this perfect, hideous, brilliant, horrible, amazing, gorgeous, toxic storm. It's that connection, that ability to forge something so deep with another woman can be flipped and can absolutely cut her off at the knees.
And it never stops, though, does it?
It's disgusting. It's awful. Who was it? Someone on the podcast, our podcast said, if they had their way, they'd make it illegal. I think it might have been Stacey Dogood. And it's true, isn't it? You'd be like, yeah, that's a hate crime right there.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's a point you make at some point in the book, which is that it's like there's all these things as we get older, all these things in our relationships that remain unsaid. But worse, some of them remain unsaid altogether, and other things remain unsaid just to people's faces.
This is my point about the honesty, because why can't we be better? If we were just truer to our feelings and tuned into our affect system properly, and we could say stuff in the moment, then it would never have to build to these levels where it kind of cuts other people down with it. often we have to do that because we've ignored ourselves until the point we can't tolerate anymore. So then we have to resort to these really underhand, sideswipey means to kind of try and wriggle out or keep ourselves safe. But if we earlier on went, no, I don't like that, or no, I'm not coming to that, you'd save yourself standing there in the corner all night going, oh, I fucking hate this.
Yeah.
Why did I come here anyway? Oh, isn't she a dick? Oh, look at her shoes, you know?
Oh, God. Who is your old bird role model?
Oh my God. I have to say Juliet Mitchell, who was my first psychoanalyst professor.
What's your superpower?
Well, this is where my therapist would be cross with me, because I think it probably is like something about, well, maybe the good side of it is reading the room. I guess let's keep it there.
Yeah, as opposed to hyper alertness.
Exactly. What do I have to do? Who needs me?
Yeah, exactly. It's not uncommon for a first guest to say empathy at that point. And I often think, in fact, I think I've said this before, is it empathy? Is empathy a superpower, or is empathy reading the room and just making sure?
Am I safe, basically?
Yeah.
And what do I have to do to keep safe?
Last one, how many fucks did you give?
27.
Why 27?
I think they are probably all wrapped up in the book could summarize them. And I try not to really, and this is probably why my anger levels have kind of shrunk down to the basics now. And it's mostly to do with, the shit that we're dealt. And I reckon that probably is about that number.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.